Hi folks! It's been a while since the last Automation Impact episode, mainly because I had a lot of work. But now I'm back, and here is the new, fresh, cool episode for you. Check it out! Hello there! Welcome to Automation Impact podcast. My name is Eduard Shlepetskyy. I'm UiPath MVP and founder of Active Automation. In this podcast, together with UiPath most valuable professionals and other guests, we are sharing our experience and best practices in intelligent automation. To learn more about the podcast, visit automationimpact.io. There, I also post short summaries for each episode. Also, you can contribute to the development of this podcast by subscribing and sharing it with your colleagues, friends, and community. Let's learn and grow together. Enjoy listening. Hello everyone. Today I'm in with Danilo McGarry, who introduced himself interestingly I would tell sir about you, how you introduce yourself on LinkedIn, but later definitely would be glad if you can bring the light on what is behind each of those titles. So, Head of Automation and AI, International Keynote Speaker, recognized industry leaders by Times, ranked as a top 10 in the world. Sir, welcome. Today we are to speak about how automation will affect individual, company, and society. But before that, please bring the light on all those titles. And what are you doing nowadays?
Yeah, thanks very much. First of all, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcasts. I hate titles. And really, who I am as a person, the essence of Danilo is a person who relentlessly wants to improve things in every shape or form. And that's how I started my career. We'll go into that in a second, perhaps. But that naturally led me to transformation, and naturally led me to innovation. And I'm a very practical person. So automation is a natural fit because automation is a practical form of transformation because you can quickly see the results and you can plan ahead, etc. So that's what I do for a day-to-day job. I also do that, as a keynote speaker. So I just go around the world. Before COVID, it was going around the world. Now it's just going around to different Zoom calls, talking in conferences, trying to disseminate good information into the market, trying to kill some falsehoods about things that are put into the market, and also just sharing my experience, the battle scars that I've had along the way, things to do with the Times, etc. It's just that I've been in different publications. I'm actually proud to be in the Times. I think it's a great publication, and Bloomberg and a few others. But who I am at heart is just somebody who wants to change and improve things. And I think automation, innovation, and using a practical sense can be very, very transformational.
Sir, and before getting into keynote speaker role and on getting on speaking to audience and sharing all this experience, I think that there is one aspect, big aspect which we need to consider here is like, what's your experience before that? So before you go and share that, yes, what are the knowledge and where the knowledge comes from, which you go and share about all this automation? What was your experience before getting on stage and speaking about it?
Sure. So just, curious as a person, since a young age, always looking to make improvements, etc. Fast forward, my first ever real job was in Motorola. I was very lucky to be in Motorola when they were the kings of the phone jungle with the Razr phone, etc. And I worked in the innovation team. And my job was to run a forum between the finance team and the technical team in order to decide what are we going to invest in next in terms of innovation. So very interesting job, very, very lucky to have that job. So, I was, Motorola, the people who invented Six Sigma, very keen users of Kaizen and Kaiban, the very nature and basics of process reengineering, continuous improvements. So I really enjoyed that. And that's where I just took off into that space. Then all the roles I had after that, mostly in financial services, were to do with operational improvement, operational efficiency, looking at, how to make the company better, faster, stronger, etc. And I just got a lot of very good breaks. Went into some managerial programs, which were very selective, and somehow I managed to get in, and just lived my way through it. I started doing automation before there were really any vendors in the market. So using macros, using scripts, re-engineering processes, etc. And then later on, as soon as Blue Prism came out, Automation Anywhere, UiPath, all of the different vendors, I started using them one by one. And I think up to date, I'm proud to say that I was the biggest client in the world for Blue Prism at one point, biggest client in the world for Automation Anywhere, and the biggest client in the world for UiPath. So I've used these tools extensively, and I think up to date now I've used 10 or 11 different automation tools, at large scale. So that's how I started. It was really just being in the right place at the right time, which was very much, the basics of automation, which is about process engineering and continuous improvement.
Were you always, how you describe it, I think that the longest journey you made is definitely in automation. How, in your experience, especially this Motorola experience, which you describe, was it linked with the continuous improvement? Was it like a one team, or did you have two separate teams, one dedicated for Lean Six Sigma and continuous improvement, and another for automation? And where did you start?
To be honest, my job in Motorola, there was no such thing as automation in terms of software robots. So that word was never kind of said in the office. Nobody really knew it. It wasn't a buzzword. It was just purely re-engineering, thinking how to do things better, measuring productivity, cutting out errors, making, small incremental changes here and there. It's only until I got into investment banking when it was kind of, let's say 2008 or 9, that then it really was about the buzzword automation. And then later on, RPA became a buzzword. And then we all know today, these words are huge now. And then now the new buzzword is AI. So it wasn't until much later that I even heard of the word automation or ever thought of it as an actual robot.
Nowadays, having those split, and I think that moving on, the split would be even bigger. That there would be like more focus on optimization itself as a role, where you would have to develop the capabilities for optimization only, as well as for automation, as well as later for AI. It's hard to imagine even nowadays that one person would combine all those roles. Were you ever at the point where you needed to decide if you are to continue with this older way of optimization, the complex approach, where you do if we speak about Lean Six Sigma, you also measure this, define, measure, analyze, and etc. Or at some point you made a decision just to focus on automation and AI. So was there ever a decision on front of you if you are to continue with one or another, or you still combine those?
To be honest, it was a natural progression. So it was kind of process reengineering, Six Sigma, Kaizen, Kaizen, etc. Then it started going into simple automation like RPA. And then it went into AI very quickly when I was head of AI for Citigroup. Then what happened most recently in the last kind of 3 or so years is I've taken all those things with me and put them all as part of the shed. So, if you think of a shed and having lots of tools in there in order to do different things in your garden, basically I keep all those tools in my shed today. So that's why, I'm leading more than just automation. It's also AI as well. But also I would never leave behind process reengineering and Six Sigma, because a lot of times when you are automating, you are also reengineering a process, and you need to still have the fundamentals of process reengineering with you. So, in the world of digital transformation and improving a company that has multiple different things that it needs and issues that it's trying to solve, you need to have multiple tools in the shed in order to service the company properly. So it's just like a mechanic. You go into a mechanic, they have hundreds of different tools for different cars and need different things. It's the same thing for a company. So today I take all those things with me, but I did, naturally progress through them one by one and become an expert in them, although I'm always learning every day. So today the art, I think, today is how do you combine all these things so that there is nothing that your company needs that you don't have? And how do you do it in a harmonious way, in a way that it doesn't create chaos, and in a way that, overall there is synergies between these different methods and approaches to improving the operational efficiency of a company.
Got it. Before we dive into our main topic of today, like effect of how automation will affect individual, company, and government, you clearly elaborate on a topic about company. Yes, so you went through several large implementations. Yeah, you mentioned that you were the largest customer for Big Three in RPA market. Can you a little bit share? You mentioned also some government experience. So can you shortly elaborate on this? Because later we will also dive into a topic, but to warm up the interest also, what was your government experience?
So there was a time where I completed just over a decade in banking. I was very tired. It was after the financial crisis, where I was doing multiple people's jobs. And also that was the time where I got the most promotions as well. So just, working hard. But I was very tired. I was burned out. And, I was still very young and I wanted to learn something different. So after becoming one of the youngest directors in Royal Bank of Canada, I left. I quit on the week that I got promoted, much to everybody's surprise. And I left. I was living in the UK. I then went to live in the Middle East. I set up my own consultation company in order to use my knowledge of digital transformation, AI, automation, to teach governments how to use this. Because it was always lingering in my mind that one day, the private sector is going to take off in this area, as it always does with innovation. And then governments are going to be, very much behind all of this. And all of the effects that can have on societies is really huge. So my little contribution to that, but also I saw an opportunity, was to open up a consultation company that would deal with governments. So I dealt with 13 different governments around the world, teaching them how to use automation, AI, and innovation in general in order to improve the way that they service their populations. So things like how to renew a passport faster, how to be more accurate in giving people speeding tickets, how to analyze populations and traffic information, things like that, how to optimize emergency services by using AI. Very interesting things. And it really was, I was really amazed at the state that a lot of governments are in. They've only just started, at that point, getting used to Excel. So if you bring onto the table, robotics and AI, it was really a different world to them. But I was very lucky that I was in the UAE. UAE is very much forward thinking, Saudi Arabia as well, thinking about the 2030 city. They're always thinking ahead. So I started really working with them first and then spreading out to governments around the world. But that was it, really, trying to give my contribution in order so that governments catch up in this very fast-paced environment.
That was my next question, and you partially already answered that. So what was your first country or the government where you started to do these initiatives? And if you still remember the first use case that you were touching there?
Oh, God. I'm actually not allowed to speak about which government for what reason. It's always tricky when you work with governments. But it was a government in the African continent. I was invited for a week-long trip in order to talk to ministers about AI and automation. And out of that, we built a roadmap for the next 3 years of what the country is going to use that for, and who are they going to give that work to, etc., etc. So it was a whole strategic workshop around that, and then I left and I supported it from a distance. But it was, very basic things like, how do they get away from using papers in government offices? How do they digitize everything? So going really back to the beginning, because if you don't digitize stuff, it's very hard to put robotics and AI onto it unless it's on the computer. What kind of camera systems would they need to do facial recognition? That kind of stuff. So it was very much around security and it was very much around just cutting costs, because governments just, not looking always at being the most efficient operations. For once, they were thinking about using their budgets a little bit better, so that they can get more out of the tax income that they get, so they can give back to the population. And also things like, I also ended up getting involved in things like blockchain. How can that be used for identity purposes? Companies like Estonia using that very thoroughly now. Blockchain identities and things like that. So that's also very interesting. And also with everything's coming back. Working with certain departments in countries where they deal with traffic. Dealing with cars and registration of cars and things like that. How can AI and automation be used along with blockchain in order, when you're selling cars, when you're receiving speeding tickets, how can it be given to a person more accurately so that they don't lose revenue as well. So it was just very varied. The beauty of it is that it was a greenfield. Most of the governments have never used AI, especially for their day-to-day operations. So every day I got a different, use case, a different thing to work on. It was very exciting.
Yeah. Later we will get to this topic also, and we will try to define the AI, because whenever I mention this AI, I always use the quotation marks, because there is like a bunch of technologies behind it. Sure, let's dive in. So impact of automation on three aspects. We have individual, we have company, and we have government, where with your rich experience in the last two, I wouldn't spend much time with the individual itself, because I think that it was quite often discussed in many different aspects. But I still want to ask one question, which is quite regular in when it touched the individual. You were mentioning about the city 2030 and the city of the future, etc. The role of individual in like 2030, and my question would be, automation will take my job. Yeah, so automation will replace human. Can you elaborate on this? This is the only question I would have to individual. Then we will go on to company and government topic.
So look, in humans are beautiful, complex creatures. We can do things with our subconscious without even really thinking about it. There's almost there's a huge way to go for a type of robot or a type of AI to replace a human. Okay, but one thing that we have to recognize is that even though we're beautiful, complex creatures that can do amazing things, we are given robotic work to do at work. So things like copying and pasting, reconciliation, sending out mass emails, all this really repetitive stuff that we could do almost in our sleep. And this is the bit that can be replaced. And that needs to be made very clear. And I think one thing that people need to do is they need to get rid of robophobia. They need to get rid of the fear of robots taking over them. They're never going to be replaced as humans, but the robotic work that people do will be replaced. And if a company has, a team that's doing something very robotic, like, scanning pieces of information and taking a file, saving it in a folder, or going into, a specific place to download files, something very robotic like that, or doing a reconciliation of some sort. If that's all that a team does, that team will be replaced by robotics. But if a team, does have, certain things that they do, which involves executive decisioning, things that they have to think about, take multiple sensory inputs, then by no means today automation or AI can replace them. And that's a very clear distinction that people have to make, because I think a lot of times people go to the very high level summary that automation will replace people. That's not the case necessarily, but it's the case when people do robotic work.
Yeah, and linking on that, like on the one hand, you have mentioned this robophobia, but on the other hand, still nowadays companies are driven by FTE saving mania. So that I will implement RPA to release FTEs, to save the cost on exactly this robotic work, etc. And I find it as a short-term goals, where in the projects which last longer for us, we already observed that this very quickly shifted from, like the focus very quickly shifted from this FTE saving mania to realizing the bigger aspects of automation, bigger aspects of AI and all the quality improvements and improvements of experience, where we can speak about the user experience, about the customer experience, employee experience, company experience. If we are to say that FTE saving mania is a short-term goal, what is the long-term vision for the company, or what vision the company should create when approaching this automation, when approaching the AI? What is the company stage of 2030 when we speak about the automation and AI?
Yeah, that's a good point. So to answer that question, I have to go back a little. So, automation in effect, when you're going to automate something, you need to understand exactly what a person is doing at a click level. Every click, every stroke of the keyboard, you have to understand exactly why they do things and look at all the decision trees that they go through for a specific process. There's nothing else that you do in working life that requires you that level of information. Nothing. So automation forces the topic of what are people doing. And it's one of the few or only things that does that in work today. So when you do that, you start understanding why the company is working in a certain way, why certain teams are taking longer than others, etc., etc. So by doing that, you very quickly start, putting the company in a way that they become experts in what they do again. They come out of their subconscious and they come and think about things more strategically. It forces the topic. When you force that topic, you end up doing a lot of things. You end up giving the company a backbone in terms of how do we do things better. But really, this time, we're really asking how do we do things, because we need to know it so that we can automate it. When you do that, you bring people closer together. You get people talking in between different teams. You get out of that team silo that exists in every company. So collaboration goes through the roof. Then, because you're doing that and you're doing it from the ground up, you're looking at the exact things that you're doing, you end up eventually impacting your clients. So the NPS score, the Net Promoter Score, different scores for measuring how happy clients are, that usually eventually gets affected by automation. Sometimes quickly, sometimes it takes a while. Because people are being given the chance to reskill and being given the chance to actually enjoy their work again and give the robotic work away and do more interesting things, employee satisfaction has shown through research that it also goes up. Sometimes exponentially, depending what kind of team and company you're in. So employee benefits, employee satisfaction goes up. Attrition rates go down. The cost of hiring, the cost of training people goes down because less people are leaving. Because you have automation, you can do more work safely with less people or the same amount of people, which means that you need less real estate. Which means that, the biggest costs in companies today are real estate and salaries of people, right? So if you eliminate having as much real estate, that's a huge saving as well. So there is a lot of tangible and intangible benefits of automation. Some of them, which people don't mention, like, the real estate thing, that's very tangible. If a client is happier and it comes through an NPS scores, that's tangible. Employee attrition rates going down, that's tangible. One thing that I do in most of my programs is I measure something called manual touch points, MTP. So that's basically how manual is the company by measuring how many times people click their mouse and type on their keyboard. So usually what I see is if a company has 4 billion touch points a year and we introduce automation, one measure of success and one measure of intangible benefit is if over time the manual touch points of humans is going down because of the work you're automating, and the manual touch points of robots is going up, as soon as you have that cross point between humans and robotics, when robots start doing more manual work than humans, that to me I think is a very great measurement of success. But can you put a number in it? No. But you got to look at everything holistically And you got to understand that a lot of people who don't understand this stuff very well, because they of ignorance or because of just lack of understanding, not everybody's going to be a genius and everything. The natural question is, how many FTEs did you save? But they don't understand that robotics stays alive for years. You build a robot today, it will stay alive for the next 3 or 4 years, and the benefits snowball, tangible and intangible. So the FTE benefit actually comes in the long run. In the short run, you can have some quick wins, sure, but in the long run, that's when you get the real FTE benefits. So it just snowballs, intangible and tangible, it snowballs over time. So I just gave a few examples there because, everybody just talks about FTE savings, but there's it's a much bigger picture, what automation does to a company and the kind of topics that it forces. So pretty big picture stuff.
So I appreciate it. And with answering this question, you probably trigger few more in my head. First of all, talking of these manual touch points, how do you measure that? Do you have any recommendations of what are the best ways of capturing this before and after picture?
There are some sleeper apps that you can put on computers that measure clicks of a mouse, clicks of a keyboard. And what you need to do, the hard part is not that. There are many vendors that do this. The hard part is collecting all of that together so that you can visualize it in Tableau or something else. So you need 1 or 2 decent data scientists to put that together for you. And depends on the organization as well and the setup. But there are some basic off-the-shelf companies you can talk to and then ask for the service. It's a sleeper app, basically, on the computer.
Yeah. Besides the clicks and mouse interactions and keyboard interactions, do you try also to capture the process already in this stage, or it is only quantifying this manual touch points, as you said? So do you try to somehow make it as a part of your process mapping?
Of course, look, to measure success and in order to measure processes, you need to actually measure the process. I just like to look at manual touch points as a very high level number because people they underestimate how manual a company is. And if, when you have that breaking point where robots start doing more manual work than humans, that's when you should start expecting some real big benefits out of automation. So it's just a high level measurement of how manual is my company today, how manual is it a year, 2 years from now after automation has been introduced. And if it comes to a point where, the manual touch points just, stay the same, then you're not doing a good job at actually making the company less manual. So it's just, it's a good measurement of the impact of automation in the company.
Got it. You have mentioned several aspects where the quality and the overall experience gets improved. You mentioned customer satisfaction, which quite often is a more not the initial goal of automation, because automation focuses on internal operations. It is quite often the result of automation. But when it comes to employee satisfaction, it is not that passive indicator where company needs to put the effort to achieve this employee satisfaction, because in some cases this automation, especially in the short term, can also cause employee dissatisfaction. So my question to you would be, if we can a little bit elaborate on the journey from the company today before having automation to the company with having automation already implemented and achieving these points of employee satisfaction. So how, after approaching the first quick wins, after approaching the first savings, and after also releasing the FTEs, not necessarily people, but FTEs in those robotic processes, manual processes, how me as a company owner or the board of the company should act to retain the people, keep people in the organization, reskill them. So what were the best strategies you observed or maybe even consult back in the past?
So remember I was saying that humans are the most beautiful creatures on earth, most complicated, intelligent. It's really about people. So, the only times I've seen where, employees were negatively impacted by automation was when they were not involved. So it's in programs where companies try to do this in a covert way, keep it very hush-hush, underground information, need-to-know basis. That's when problems arise because people start realizing that something strange is happening and their guard goes up. But if you introduce it as, hey, make it very public, very open. Everybody gets to see the information, even make a bit too much noise about the information. And you involve people as champions of processes, champions of automation projects, even make them sponsors of projects, reskill them along the way. Then very quickly, people are both going to get the skill to do it, but also they're going to get the enjoyment of actually delivering something new and a new skill set they never had before. So one thing that I love doing is having something like an automation champions program, where we give people a chance to skill, to learn how to automate, learn how to build robots. So they would go in, for instance, if it was UiPath, go into UiPath Academy. If it's a business analyst or project manager for automation projects, teach them the basics of, how to look after and run automation projects. So we set up all of these courses in the company I'm in now and previous companies, where it became very open and transparent. Hey, if you want to learn how to do this, you can take the time to do it. And if you want to, raise a project that's very good, you will become the sponsor of it and you will be involved in it every single day. So it's all about involving people. Just going to the client bit real quick. In today's world, automation is something that is expected. It's no longer that shiny toy that only the top companies have anymore. All the middle tier companies are going after this as well. So when a client is working with you, they're expecting you to have AI and automation in some form. Otherwise, it's not good value for money, right? They can go and talk to somebody else who has it, who is a competitor. So a lot of times what happens is the reason why you can very quickly see an impact on clients is because they actually request you to automate things for them. So they come to you and say, hey, that service you provide for me every month or every year, I want you to automate it, please, because there's been too many errors. And then if you don't have an automation team, you're going to lose that client very quickly. So it's an expectation today. And that's why you see customer satisfaction goes up quicker, because they know about your automation project. They request it and they're expecting it to be delivered. And when you deliver it, they will see the impact of how it was done when humans were doing it. So just those two things I want to put out there, because, not everybody's going to have the same success or the same approach to automation. And that means they're going to have different outcomes, but it doesn't mean that everybody will have the same outcome. So reskilling is really about, you don't automate the company first and then reskill people. What you do is you reskill people while you're automating the company. That's the trick there. And you kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone.
Maybe elaborating a little bit on what you have mentioned about the customer, you shift the focus a bit on the end. I want to also elaborate on this, that back in the past, when you say that you do automation, people may guess about the macros, about those scripts, etc. And it was kind of a niche, yeah? So you do certain activities within the automation. But nowadays, what I would like to highlight is that automation is not anymore a niche or a project that you implement the automation in a company. Yeah, same as back in the past, like improvement initiative. It is not something that you just do in a company, but if you follow the Lean Six Sigma, it is a continuous improvement. And I just was speaking last week on one conference about automation versus optimization, like what should go first, etc. And when elaborating on optimization, I was saying that it is like Lean Six Sigma it's not a project, but it is mindset in the company. It is what the whole company is living. And now with automation, I see the same thing happening. It is not anymore the tiny niche or tiny companies are doing it, or some project or service you receive in your company, but it becomes a mindset. It becomes a style of the company, and it becomes the work style. It's not a lifestyle, but it is a work style of each company. And when it comes to RPA, I hardly can imagine the company where RPA cannot be adapted, or where AI cannot be adapted. The question is in what form, in what areas, but I think that even now it is everywhere, and in few more years I can't imagine the company which haven't had an experience with it. So can you a little bit maybe elaborate on the automation as a lifestyle, not the automation as a project, but automation as a way of thinking, and the new continuous, if we had the continuous improvement, now we have continuous automation and implementation of AI.
That's it for today.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. Don't forget to visit our web automationimpact.io and share this episode on social media. It helps to grow and develop the podcast. Thank you.